Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to podcast number 47-ish. I don't know. That's really a stab in the dark. But wanted to get one out there since we didn't get one last week, and I was called out by somebody, you know who you are, for basically doing 1 week on, 1 week off the last few weeks. With that being said, I'm incredibly busy. So one of the things I want to talk about maybe moving forward in these intros is giving you kind of just general, very vague updates as to kind of where I am in my mindset. Because one of the things I want to avoid in doing this podcast is giving you a perception that I myself have all the answers. These self-help people and these people that want to tell you how to live your life often enough have their own demons that they're running from. And I'm not running from any demons, but I definitely want to give you a perception of what reality is, because any sort of time that you choose to take on an endeavor that is difficult or that takes a large amount of effort, there's going to be ups and downs, just like life, right? It's often a roller coaster. So because I come on this podcast and I continue to just rant about what I feel is this right path or that right path or the lesson I learned, or for asking you to apply certain things in your life, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a true master at that one thing. With that being said, I also feel like for someone to be a true master in something, you do have to commit a tremendous amount of time for. You will never be a true master at anything unless you likely have dedicated your life to it. That's just the way I define mastery. But I digress. So I think maybe what I'll spend a couple minutes in doing in the beginning of the podcast is just explain to you folks kind of what I'm doing and kind of what superficially I'm kind of experiencing in a way, to kind of show you how I'm approaching certain things, but also to further ingrain the idea that these lessons, the gems, if you will, that I continue to push on you folks, are things that I either implement on my own and have naturally ingrained them in my being as a sort, or are things that I also struggle with remembering to set up and implement in my own lifetime. Because some of these things are incredibly challenging to do. And sometimes when you're in the box and you're just grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding, it's hard to take a step out of that box and to observe what the situation around you is. And oftentimes in those grinding moments, we're taking baby steps to the end goal, right? But there's oftentimes ways where we could have circumvented taking a handful of steps and just taking a large leap forward. When you're deep in the box, it's hard for you to sit there and really try to take a step forward in the most efficient manner because you're so focused on that moment. That is no different than when you're in a high pressure situation and you have a hard time making decisions because you're in the situation, you're in the moment. Your feelings, your nerves are activated and you cannot make a choice because you're a little paralyzed, right? Paralysis by analysis in a way. But there's often a way where if you did this or that, you would have saved yourself 3-4 steps. So I think that's moving forward what we'll do. And so as I continue to kind of like allude to the busyness, I don't know if that's even really a word that I'm currently enduring right now. It's just I'm got a lot of balls in the air, if you will. And as I progress through this year, I'll bring you folks into those a little bit more. But I'm one of those people that is very, very superficially superstitious, if you will. Say that 5 times fast. And so until I'm really in the deep end of the pool, I don't want to say I'm swimming yet. So for the record, I'm not yet swimming. So I'm working towards swimming. And when I'm swimming and I can get a couple of strokes in the pool and I got my technique down, I'll bring you folks into that as well. But as I continue to work, as much as I work, my commute is less than desirable. As I continue to take on all these extracurriculars and then still try to maintain these podcasts, try to maintain my woodworking projects, and still do all the normal stuff, which is researching behind the projects, because as I continue to progress in woodworking, for example, I'm not just doing basic things. I'm trying to increase my knowledge base. I'm trying to increase the complexity of what I can pull off. And sometimes I dive incredibly deep into the deep end, like I did with the kitchen, and where it comes off very, very well. And it comes off like I'm skilled more so than I really am. But sometimes when it comes to things that are completely out of my nature, like, for example, electronics, which some of you know I hate, and as I continue to implement new things like LED projects and things that require a different level of expertise, that requires research, that requires understanding, that requires researching products, buying products, figuring out how they work, implementing them, getting a certain knowledge base when it comes to those products. And as I continue to evolve the woodworking and add some of those factors in it, it still requires research. And I continue to push for more and more things, and there's some of these extracurriculars I allude to, and these are all things I'm trying to maintain at the same time, right? And every single one of these aspects requires a certain level of time management and efficiencies. And like, one of the things I've been focusing on is trying to get interviews for this podcast. And I'm trying to line a few of them up so that this year I could get a handful. In fact, more than that is my actual goal, but we won't get there yet. And every single one of these takes time. Any of you that have ever done an interview with me on this podcast know that it's not just me and you talking, shooting the shit. There's a little bit of preparation involved with that. I do like having meaningful questions. I do like having a certain level of preparedness so that things flow beautifully. And in doing that, it takes time. And so I'm trying to find efficient ways to manage my time. And I feel like I'm getting there. It's not perfected yet. And while I find it hilarious, it's like I sit here and I I'm like, oof, I'm about to start this other thing next month, and this is going to be even more on my plate. And I'm juggling even more than before. And already I'm thinking, like, do I have enough? Can I do it? And there's a little voice in the back of my mind that pops in automatically within finishing that sentence in my own brain. The sentence always comes back as more. You can do more. You can accomplish more. You can find more efficiencies in your process. You can continue to do more than you think you can. And this goes back to what I tell you guys before about, especially in that podcast episode named More. There's always better ways to do things. And even if you look back at history, right? There are times in history where people didn't think certain things were possible. Whether those are scientific feats, whether those were just plain records in some sort of athletic endeavor, right? There's a point, let's take a sport that everybody understands, right? Like the long jump. There's a point where the long jump was determined to be a certain amount of distance, and people thought like, oh, we're not ever going to be able to pass that number. That's the best humans can do. And then at some point, some freak athlete who felt like they were above the normal standard and believed in themselves enough, broke that record. And then continuously we do this as humans. Is there going to be a stopping point? Maybe. It also depends on how far we get with pharmaceuticals, but that's a point for a later podcast. My point to all this is saying that in history there's always been times where we tell ourselves this is impossible until somebody comes through and does the impossible. And my mind will always gravitate towards there being more time, more efficiencies. You can do more. You can continue to push. You can always do more. Just like I talked about in that podcast episode. And some of you that are close to me and some of you that I've had conversations with and have had a chance to really take a deep dive. Like I've had these conversations where, people feel taxed and people feel stressed and people feel anxiety and people feel like they can't do anymore or they can't really like fit more into their schedule. And I've pushed back on that because in my mind there's always more. And some of that comes with maybe you're not going to get more time in your day, but you will find efficiencies and better ways of doing things. You will find better ways to leverage your time, your resources, your technology, the people in your lives, better ways of training the things that are making difficult things in your life, whatever it is, there's always ways to find efficiencies and find better ways of doing things in life. If we're talking about financial success, you could sit here and say, I'm going to go work at McDonald's and work 40 hours a week, and then I'm going to become really disciplined and become a manager, and then become maybe a regional manager, and eventually you'll make that six-figure salary, right? That's a way of doing it. Or maybe you leverage your natural skills as an athlete, you make six figures in half the time. My whole point to that example is that there's always efficiencies on how to do it. And it goes back to being in that box. If you get yourself out of that box for a second and try to find efficiencies on how to do things, you might find a better path to get to that end goal before you commit a whole bunch of years or months or days taking baby steps to get you there. I feel like I can make a whole podcast out of this, and I almost feel like I should stop the podcast here, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm at a point where I'm continuing to keep my goals aligned to what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to maintain as much of the things that I've been able to do over the last few years and maintain those things at a high level, whether it's my performance at work, whether it's my woodworking, continue to progress that, whether it's these extracurriculars, whether it's my friendships or my family or whatever. Like, the goal is always to continue to keep all of those things at the highest level possible while still continuing to grow each of those sections. In fact, if you would have asked me this a year ago, like, I would have likely told you, like, there's no more I can take on. There just isn't, because there was just so much I was already doing. There was woodworking projects, there was me working full time. Oh yeah, by the way, still trying to keep a certain level of physical fitness. Then there's still me trying to like learn and research and do these things that I'm trying to do to progress these things all together, right? At those times, if you would ask me like, can you take on more? Can you do this? And I was like, ugh, that's going to be hard to do. And now I talk to you months into 2023, doing all of those things and some, trying to improve everything, maintain everything, and yet still continue to push all of those aspects to a higher level. And I'm doing it pretty well. And that's coming from a person that has a hard time patting themselves on the back. And so we'll just leave you with this topic this week. I'll leave you with the idea of this. I urge you to think about the things that you find challenging, the things you don't think you have time for, whether it's maybe taking the time to maybe make your food that way you don't spend money and eat healthier at work, right? Whether it's you sitting there maybe getting some workouts in when you don't think you have the time, whether it's you managing your family dynamic and finding a little peace and quiet every once in a while. Whatever your thing is, whatever is the one thing that you would like to be able to do, I like to challenge you into finding a way to fit that into your life. Because there's a way. And I'm convinced there's a way to do it. Whether or not you can find a way to do it is up to you. But you have to find a way to fit it into your schedule. And you have to find a way to prioritize that thing. It can't be an option. Make it a requirement and figure out what you need to change or leverage or manipulate or what you need to do in order to get that thing in your routine. Because there's a way. And I'm going to tell you right now, later on this year, when I continue to kind of allude to all the things I've done, and when I continue to look back at 2023, and I look at the projects completed, I look at the time I spent at work, the successes at work, the successes in personal life, the successes in all this stuff. First and foremost, I'll be satisfied and happy with what I've accomplished this year, more than probably any other year. But most importantly, I'll also be able to sit back and say, these things were all managed at a high level all year long. Why can't you do what you're trying to do? And I will ask you that question at the end of the year. But that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I was going to give you another podcast. I was going to give you another topic, but I feel like as we near our 15-20 minute interval, I feel like this is good for this week. I hope to talk to you folks next week. Questions, comments, feedback, send it my way. LifeGeneralist on Instagram. And we'll talk next week.